Many people believe seriousness is a sign of maturity. Carl Jung saw something else. He noticed that when life becomes too rigid, too controlled, too heavy, the psyche begins to suffocate. You try to manage everything, explain everything, secure everything, and slowly lose the ability to feel alive. Playfulness, curiosity, and spontaneity are not childish traits. They are signs of psychological health. When a person takes life too seriously, the ego tightens its grip, imagination dries up, and joy becomes suspicious. What looks like discipline often hides fear. And what feels like responsibility can quietly become a prison. When seriousness begins to dominate a person's life, it is rarely a sign of strength. More often, it is a signal that the ego feels threatened. Life is uncertain by nature, full of contradiction and change, and the ego does not tolerate this easily. It longs for structure, predictability, and control. Seriousness becomes its preferred strategy. By tightening its grip, the ego attempts to impose order on a world that refuses to be fully ordered. What begins as discipline slowly turns into rigidity. I have often seen this pattern in people who feel overwhelmed by responsibility or fear making mistakes. They approach life as a problem to be solved, rather than an experience to be lived. Every action must be justified, every feeling explained, every outcome anticipated. There is little room for error, and even less room for play. The ego believes that if it relaxes for a moment, something terrible will happen. So it remains tense, alert, and guarded. Over time, this constant vigilance drains vitality from the psyche. This rigidity does not create safety. It creates pressure. The psyche is not designed to live under permanent control. It requires movement, flexibility, and moments of lightness to remain healthy. When seriousness hardens into a permanent attitude, inner life begins to narrow. Curiosity fades. Imagination is dismissed as impractical. Joy feels irresponsible. The individual may appear mature and composed, yet inwardly they feel dry, exhausted, and strangely disconnected from life itself. The tragedy is that this seriousness often masquerades as virtue. Society praises those who are always composed, always productive, always in control. But psychological health cannot be measured by external order alone. The unconscious resists domination. When it is denied expression, it pushes back in subtle ways through anxiety, irritability, sudden emotional outbursts, or a vague sense that something is missing. The ego tightens further, mistaking these signals as proof that it must work even harder to maintain control. True strength lies not in constant seriousness, but in elasticity. A psyche that can bend without breaking is far more resilient than one locked into rigid discipline. Control has its place, but when it becomes absolute, it suffocates the very life it seeks to protect. And perhaps this is the quiet warning worth remembering. When seriousness becomes your armor, it may also become the weight that slowly crushes your capacity to feel alive. When the play instinct is suppressed, the psyche slowly loses one of its most vital sources of renewal. Play is not a distraction from life. It is a way the unconscious explores, experiments, and restores balance. In children, this is obvious. They learn, adapt, and express themselves through play. But this function does not disappear with age. It remains active throughout life, though often driven underground by social expectation and fear of appearing foolish. When a person takes life too seriously, this instinct is among the first casualties. I have observed that playfulness is closely linked to creativity, imagination, and emotional flexibility. Through play, the psyche moves freely, unburdened by outcome or evaluation. It allows contradictions to coexist, ideas to mingle, and feelings to surface without immediate judgment. When play is denied, thought becomes rigid, and feeling becomes constrained. Life begins to feel heavy, not because it is inherently so, but because one has removed the very function that allows the psyche to breathe. Many adults dismiss play as irresponsible or unproductive. They confuse seriousness with depth and mistake lightness for shallowness. Yet the unconscious does not recognize such moral distinctions. It responds to movement, symbolism, and spontaneity. Without these, inner life stagnates. Dreams lose vitality, imagination dulls, and emotional expression narrows. The individual may become efficient, but efficiency alone cannot sustain the soul. Suppressed play often returns in distorted forms. It may emerge as impulsive behavior, compulsive pleasure-seeking, or cynical humor. In other cases, it appears as chronic boredom or restlessness. The psyche demands expression, and when healthy channels are blocked, it finds less constructive ones. This is why many who live under constant seriousness feel secretly drained or dissatisfied, despite outward success. Allowing space for play does not mean abandoning responsibility. It means restoring balance. Play reintroduces curiosity into life. It softens rigid attitudes and allows the ego to loosen its grip. When one plays even briefly, something essential is remembered: that life is not solely a test to be passed, but a process to be experienced. The most psychologically mature individuals I have known were not those who lived in constant solemnity, but those who could approach life with both depth and lightness. They understood when to be serious and when to let go. And perhaps this is the quiet truth: the part of you that knows how to play is not childish. It is the part that keeps your psyche alive. There is a particular danger in building an identity around responsibility alone. At first, it appears admirable. One becomes reliable, disciplined, dependable. Others lean on you. Society rewards you. But slowly, almost unnoticed, something essential is sacrificed. The personality narrows itself to a single role, the one who carries weight, who holds things together, who never falters. This over-identification feels necessary, even noble, yet psychologically it is deeply one-sided. I have seen many individuals who define themselves entirely by what they must do, rather than who they are. Their sense of worth became tied to usefulness. Rest felt undeserved. Pleasure felt suspicious. Spontaneity felt dangerous. The psyche, however, does not thrive under permanent obligation. Responsibility is meant to be one function among many, not the whole structure of the self. When it becomes dominant, other parts of the personality are pushed into silence. This imbalance produces a quiet erosion of vitality. One may continue functioning efficiently, yet feel increasingly empty. Joy loses its immediacy. Relationships feel transactional. Life becomes something to manage rather than participate in. The unconscious reacts strongly to this condition. What is neglected does not disappear. It withdraws and waits. Often it returns as exhaustion, irritability, sudden loss of motivation, or a vague sense of bitterness that cannot be easily explained. The tragedy is that such individuals often believe they cannot afford to loosen their grip. They fear that if they stop being responsible, everything will collapse. Yet this belief reveals how tightly the ego has identified with control. True responsibility does not require constant self-denial. In fact, when a person allows no room for inner renewal, their capacity to carry responsibility eventually weakens. The psyche becomes brittle. Psychological health depends on range. A whole person can be serious without becoming heavy, committed without becoming rigid. When responsibility is integrated rather than idolized, it no longer drains life. It becomes an expression of inner choice instead of inner pressure. One acts not because one must, but because one is aligned. This shift requires courage. One must question long-held assumptions about worth and maturity. One must allow moments of ease without guilt. Such changes often feel uncomfortable at first because they threaten an identity built on endurance alone. But gradually, energy returns. The personality breathes again. And perhaps this is the quiet realization that brings relief. You were never meant to carry life endlessly, only to engage it fully, with strength and with lightness. When life is approached only with heaviness, meaning itself begins to suffer. Many people assume that meaning must be earned through struggle, seriousness, and constant effort. They believe that if something feels light, it must be shallow. Yet psychologically, meaning does not grow under pressure alone. It grows through engagement, curiosity, and a willingness to explore without knowing exactly where one will arrive. When everything becomes weighted with consequence, the soul retreats. I have often noticed that those who live under continuous inner pressure begin to lose their sense of orientation. They work harder, think more, and try to be more disciplined, yet feel increasingly distant from any genuine sense of purpose. Meaning cannot be forced into existence. It is discovered, not manufactured. When the psyche is denied moments of ease, imagination closes in on itself. Questions become rigid. Life feels mechanical. The individual may continue moving forward, but without the inner experience that gives direction, its value. Lightness does not mean carelessness. It means allowing room for curiosity and experimentation. It is the attitude that says, I will engage with life without demanding certainty at every step. This openness invites meaning to emerge organically. Many of the most important insights in a person's life arise unexpectedly in moments of play, reflection, or quiet wonder. When seriousness dominates, these moments are dismissed as unproductive, and meaning loses its living quality. The unconscious responds poorly to excessive pressure. When meaning is treated like a duty rather than a discovery, the psyche withdraws its energy. What remains is effort without inspiration. This is why some people achieve everything they set out to achieve and still feel empty. They approached life as a task to complete rather than a dialogue to enter. Without lightness, meaning becomes abstract, distant, and dry. Allowing lightness restores movement. It loosens rigid expectations and makes space for symbolic experience. One begins to notice beauty again, irony, subtle joy. These experiences are not trivial. They nourish the psyche and reconnect the individual with a sense of aliveness that seriousness alone cannot provide. Meaning returns not as a grand answer, but as a quiet sense that life is worth engaging. When pressure eases, the soul speaks more clearly. One does not abandon responsibility. One approaches it differently, with curiosity instead of fear, with openness instead of control. And perhaps this is the quiet truth often overlooked. Meaning cannot survive in a life that has forgotten how to feel light, even for a moment. When people hear the phrase inner child, they often misunderstand it. They imagine something sentimental or immature, a call to regress rather than to grow. But psychologically, this image points to something far more serious. It refers to the original source of vitality, imagination, and emotional truth within the psyche. This part of the self is not weak. It is instinctive, curious, and deeply connected to life. When it is ignored or dismissed, the personality loses contact with one of its most important foundations. I have observed that many adults learned early that certain qualities were unacceptable. Spontaneity was called irresponsible. Sensitivity was labeled weakness. Curiosity was seen as distraction. In order to adapt, these qualities were pushed aside. The person learned how to function, how to succeed, how to be taken seriously. Yet the cost of this adaptation often appears later in the form of emotional dryness or a persistent sense of inner fatigue. Something essential was left behind. The so-called inner child carries not only playfulness, but emotional honesty. It knows when something feels right or wrong long before the intellect can explain it. When this voice is silenced, the individual becomes increasingly dependent on rules, expectations, and external validation. Decisions are made according to what seems correct, rather than what feels alive. Over time, this creates a subtle resentment toward life itself. One does everything properly, yet feels strangely unrewarded. Ignoring this inner source does not eliminate it. It retreats into the unconscious, where it waits. Sometimes it emerges in unexpected ways: sudden mood swings, irrational sadness, bursts of longing, or a sense of emptiness that appears without clear cause. These are not signs of immaturity. They are signals that a living part of the psyche is asking to be acknowledged. Reintegrating this aspect does not mean abandoning adulthood or responsibility. It means allowing room for imagination, emotional expression, and genuine curiosity within a mature structure. When this happens, seriousness softens, life regains color. One can engage deeply without becoming heavy. Personality becomes more flexible, more resilient, and more humane. Those who refuse this integration often become rigid and bitter. Those who allow it become grounded without becoming dull. They carry authority without hardness. They know how to work, but also how to wonder. And perhaps this is the essential reminder. The part of you that still knows how to feel, imagine, and play is not something to outgrow. It is something you must bring with you if you wish to stay fully alive.
Nice.
Psychological health is never found at the extremes. A life lived without seriousness lacks depth and direction, yet a life lived without lightness slowly hardens. The task of maturity is not to choose one over the other, but to learn how to hold both. Many people believe they must always be tense in order to be responsible, always vigilant in order to be safe. Yet the psyche functions best when it is allowed to move between effort and ease, focus and release. Without this rhythm, inner life becomes strained. I've often seen that those who know when to let go are not less capable, but more resilient. They are able to face difficulty without being consumed by it. They take life seriously when seriousness is required, yet they do not turn every moment into a burden. This flexibility allows the psyche to recover, creates space for reflection, humor, and renewal. When life is held too tightly, it slips through the fingers. When it is held with awareness and openness, it can be lived more fully. Holding life lightly does not mean avoiding responsibility or denying suffering. It means recognizing that not everything can be controlled, predicted, or solved through effort alone. There are moments when acceptance is wiser than struggle, when curiosity is more useful than certainty. The ego resists this understanding because it threatens its sense of control. Yet control is not the same as mastery. True mastery comes from relationship, not domination. This balance allows the individual to remain present without becoming overwhelmed. One learns to respond rather than react, to engage without exhausting oneself. Serious matters are addressed with care, but they are not allowed to eclipse the whole of existence. Joy, humor, and play regain their rightful place, not as escapes, but as essential movements of the psyche. When this attitude develops, life begins to feel less oppressive. Problems remain, but they no longer define the entire inner landscape. One can suffer without losing perspective. One can work without losing vitality. This is not optimism. It is psychological realism. The psyche requires both gravity and lightness to remain whole. Perhaps the greatest irony is that those who hold life too tightly often feel most trapped, while those who allow themselves room to breathe feel more grounded and free. This freedom does not come from escaping life's weight, but from learning how to carry it without being crushed. And perhaps this is the final lesson worth remembering. Life asks to be taken seriously, but not so seriously that you forget how to live.